Look like one WNBA player has found herself in major hot water after making some troubling statements about Charlie Kirk.
The WNBA has found itself pulled into a storm that has nothing to do with basketball. Natasha Cloud, a player known for her outspoken nature, is facing the harshest spotlight of her career after her social media activity crossed a line many believe should never be crossed. Following the shocking public death of conservative activist Charlie Kirk, Cloud took to Twitter with a series of comments that stunned fans, critics, and even her own teammates.
No one deserves to die for their beliefs. Let's just all keep it 100. We just got to keep it real. Because if that's the case, people will be getting murdered every day. Now, one WNBA player has basically been talking about this thing the last couple of days, ever since this happened, is none other than, y'all guess it, Natasha Cloud.
What might have started as frustration quickly spiraled into a controversy that has the sports, world, and political world colliding in explosive fashion. Screenshots spread like wildfire, deleted posts resurfaced, and calls for punishment grew louder by the hour. This isn't just another case of an athlete speaking their mind. It's a story that raises uncomfortable questions about free speech, responsibility, and the growing danger of mixing politics with professional sports. And this was only the beginning.
Now, Natasha Cloud balled out last time we seen her on the basketball court. She basically turned that frustrations and applied it to the basketball game because she's making major headlines, man. Even a couple of days after this, she's still tweeting and talking about this whole Charlie Kirk thing.
The controversy around Natasha Cloud didn't come out of nowhere. It began when the shocking news of Charlie Kirk's public death dominated national headlines. For days, the nation was divided. On one side were those who despised Kirk's politics but were horrified by the violence that ended his life. On the other side were voices claiming his own rhetoric had created the environment that led to his demise. Social media quickly became the battlefield, and every major outlet reported on the story. Emotions were running high, and people were searching for someone to blame. Into this tense atmosphere stepped Natasha Cloud, who has never shied away from making her opinions public.
The WNBA has chosen to continue to platform and keep Natasha Cloud employed. In fact, she came out and stated blatant lies about Charlie Kirk.
Cloud had been known throughout her career as a player willing to speak up on controversial issues, but this time, the stakes were different. Charlie Kirk's death wasn't just a sports headline, it was a politically charged event that brought out anger, grief, and hostility from millions of people. When Cloud began tweeting about the situation, her words immediately drew attention. What might have been dismissed as personal commentary from a private citizen became explosive once people remembered she was a professional athlete, representing not just herself, but also her team and the WNBA.
Natasha Cloud said this: he lobbied to be shot in public. He literally called for public executions. I mean, blatant lies.
The first signs of trouble came when fans discovered Cloud's tweets questioning whether people were truly upset about Kirk's assassination, or more concerned about the league's leadership decisions. Her comments seemed to blur the line between sarcasm and seriousness. To her critics, it looked like she was mocking Kirk's death, a moment that many believed should never be treated lightly. Within hours, screenshots of her posts were circulating across Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Even though she deleted some of the tweets, the damage was done.
She deleted some stuff, man. This is what she put up on social media the other day. That kind of got her in this hot water. It stated breaking Americans are reportedly furious as WNBA player Natasha Cloud continues to play in the league after posting Charlie Kirk lobbied to be shot in public on X. And now she deleted the post. Yes, she did delete the post.
Fans who once admired Cloud for her fearless personality suddenly turned on her. Posts flooded in calling for suspensions, fines, and even her removal from the league. Supporters of Kirk demanded accountability, arguing that joking about a man's murder, no matter one's political views, crossed a moral boundary.
So she's out there, and I'm going to tell you, she went absolutely unhinged. Her Twitter feed is full of blatant bullshit.
Meanwhile, some of her defenders tried to frame the backlash as an overreaction. claiming she was exercising free speech in a country that often silences outspoken women athletes. The outrage wasn't limited to social media. Sports talk shows and podcasts picked up the story, amplifying it to a national level. Headlines framed Cloud as under fire, and the New York Liberty were suddenly forced to deal with questions that had nothing to do with basketball. Reporters began asking teammates how they felt about Cloud's statements, and whether her actions were distracting the team during the playoff push. What should have been a celebration of postseason basketball had turned into a political circus, and this was just the beginning.
The Post stated, "Are you upset that Charlie Kirk was executed for the world to see just because he had a different view or different opinions, or that dumb WBAPA leaders, one being your teammate Stewart, wants to pay former players just because they played years ago and somehow they deserve money?" Then she went on to say he lobbied to be shot in public. He literally called for a public execution. So that is the statement there that kind of got her in this damn situation.
The deleted tweet was bad enough, but what came next? More posts, harsher language, and an increasingly defensive tone would escalate the scandal into something much larger. The story wasn't fading away. It was only picking up momentum, pulling Cloud deeper into controversy with every passing day.
You being a professional athlete, now I can understand people want their voices to be heard and don't want to stand up for what's right, but it's time to play. You're in the playoffs right now. Like you're in the playoffs. You should be focused on playoffs.
If there was one moment that pushed Natasha Cloud from outspoken athlete to national controversy, it was the tweet she posted and then quickly deleted. In today's digital world, nothing ever truly disappears, and that reality came crashing down on her. Screenshots of her words spread faster than any highlight reel she's ever been a part of. The post wasn't vague or indirect, it directly referenced Charlie Kirk, suggesting that he had practically lobbied to be shot in public. It was a statement that many interpreted as callous, insensitive, and shockingly inappropriate given the weight of the moment. The timing made it even worse. Kirk's assassination had barely sunk in when Cloud pressed send. For many, her words crossed a line from political opinion into mockery of death. Critics were quick to argue that, regardless of what anyone thought of Kirk's views, celebrating or trivializing his killing was unacceptable. What inflamed the situation further was that Cloud initially stood by her words before choosing to delete the post. By then, the damage was irreversible. Fans, political commentators, and media outlets latched onto the deleted tweet. Some called it evidence of a lack of self-awareness, while others accused her of outright hatred. How can someone who plays in a professional league, watched by millions, post something like this? One commentator asked on a national radio show, the New York Liberty Clouds team immediately found themselves caught in the storm. Their playoff run was overshadowed by constant questions about whether Cloud's social media actions reflected poorly on the franchise. But as damaging as the deleted tweet was, the backlash wasn't universal. A segment of Cloud supporters rushed to defend her, arguing that she was highlighting Kirk's own controversial statements and that her words were being twisted. These defenders claimed she was exercising her right to free speech, pointing out that male athletes had said provocative things in the past with far less punishment or scrutiny. To them, the outrage was more about who Cloud was, a woman, a vocal athlete, and a player in a league already under a magnifying glass than about the tweet itself. Still, the overwhelming tide of criticism couldn't be ignored. News cycles replayed her deleted post word for word, dissecting its meaning. Pundits debated whether she had crossed into dangerous territory by appearing to justify violence. Former players weighed in, warning that moments like these can stain a career for years. It wasn't just about Natasha. Cloud anymore, it became about the WNBA's image as a whole. And as people thought the controversy might cool down with her deletion, more fuel was added to the fire. Other old tweets surfaced, filled with harsher language that critics argued proved this wasn't an isolated slip. Each new screenshot added layers to the scandal, making it impossible to separate Cloud from the outrage. The deleted tweet was the spark, but the flames were about to get much hotter. Deleting one tweet might have contained the damage, but what surfaced next made the situation spiral completely out of control. Natasha Cloud's critics began digging deeper, and it didn't take long before more of her posts started circulating online. These weren't just heated opinions about politics, they carried racial undertones that added a whole new dimension to the backlash. One of her most widely shared lines described Charlie Kirk as a white boy, a phrase that many immediately labeled as racially charged and hypocritical, especially given Cloud's own biracial background. The reaction was swift and merciless. News outlets picked up the language, headlines blared about racially tinged comments, and fans accused her of tearing down the very values she often claimed to stand for. Critics argued that it wasn't just insensitive to joke about someone's death, it was downright divisive to layer it with racial hostility. Suddenly, this wasn't only a story about free speech or political disagreement. It had become a debate about race, hypocrisy, and the limits of acceptable commentary in professional sports. Her defenders tried once again to explain the context, arguing that Cloud's comments were born out of frustration with the political climate. But context mattered little in the world of screenshots and viral outrage. The internet thrives on sound bites, and Cloud's words were now packaged and shared without nuance, fueling narratives that painted her as reckless and unfit to represent a league striving for broader mainstream appeal. The fallout also stretched into the locker room. Teammates, who had nothing to do with the controversy, found themselves fielding awkward questions. Reporters asked Breanna Stewart and Sabrina Ionescu whether Cloud's comments reflected poorly on the New York Liberty as an organization. Even players who weren't close to her were suddenly connected to the drama simply because they shared the same jersey. For a team fighting to keep focus during a playoff push, this was the last thing they needed. The wider sports media piled on. Debate shows, podcasts, and online commentators dissected every word of her posts. Some accused her of deliberately provoking controversy to draw attention. Others claimed she had fallen victim to the impulsiveness of social media, posting in the heat of the moment without thinking about the consequences. Either way, the damage was multiplying. What started as one deleted tweet was now an avalanche of criticism. The narrative around Cloud shifted dramatically. Instead of being seen as a strong voice for justice, she was being cast as a distraction, someone unable to separate activism from professionalism. And with each new resurfaced tweet, the question grew louder. How long could the WNBA ignore this without taking action? The public backlash was already damaging enough, but the next twist in the story made the controversy even bigger. A giant of sports media, Stephen A. Smith, decided to weigh in, and his response would put the entire situation on a much larger stage. When Stephen A. Smith speaks, the sports world listens. Known for his fiery takes and commanding presence, Smith has built a career on tackling controversial issues head-on. So, when Natasha Cloud's tweets began dominating headlines, it was only a matter of time before he weighed in. His comments, delivered with trademark passion, reframed the entire conversation and drew millions more eyes to a scandal that was already spiraling out of control. On his show, Smith didn't mince words. He acknowledged the divisive nature of Charlie Kirk's politics, but made it clear that those debates meant nothing in the face of what had happened. Nobody deserves to die for their beliefs, he said with a somber tone. He reminded viewers that disagreement, no matter how intense, never justifies violence. His message was simple, yet powerful. Murder cannot be excused, rationalized, or laughed about, not in sports, not in politics, not anywhere. What made his commentary even more impactful was the personal story he shared. Smith revealed how his daughters expressed their fear for his safety after Kirk's death. They told him they would rather have a father who was safe than one who was rich or successful but vulnerable to such violence. That admission struck a nerve with viewers. It humanized the issue and shifted the focus from politics to basic humanity. Suddenly, the debate wasn't about whether people agreed with Kirk's ideology, it was about the value of life itself. In direct contrast to Cloud's tweets, Smith's words came across as measured and empathetic. While Cloud's posts seemed impulsive and biting, Smith projected maturity and clarity. He wasn't defending Kirk's politics, but he was defending the principle that no one, regardless of their beliefs, should face execution in the public square. This framing made Cloud look even more reckless, and many commentators pointed out the glaring difference between how the two public figures handled the same event. Smith also touched on a larger theme: the danger of normalizing hatred toward people with opposing views. He warned that once society accepts the idea that violence is a justifiable response to disagreement, there's no turning back. This perspective resonated far beyond sports fans. Political commentators and everyday viewers shared clips of his speech, praising him for saying what they felt needed to be said. For Natasha Cloud, though Smith's intervention was a disaster, his voice carried authority, and once he positioned himself firmly against her comments, the court of public opinion tilted heavily against her. Fans who might have defended her before were now hesitant to push back against Smith's stance. After all, he hadn't spoken as a partisan, but as a father and as someone calling for basic human decency. The contrast was impossible to ignore. One athlete's impulsive tweets versus one broadcaster's heartfelt clarity. And while Smith's words brought order to the chaos, they also deepened the scrutiny on Cloud. The question looming now was clear. If Stephen A. Smith could strike the right tone, why couldn't she? But this wasn't just about one player's mistake. Anymore, it was about a growing debate over the role of athletes in activism, and whether Cloud had crossed the line between using her platform and abusing it. That debate was about to intensify. Natasha Cloud's controversy reignited a debate that has been brewing in sports for decades. When should athletes speak out, and when should they stay silent? From Muhammad Ali refusing to fight in Vietnam to Colin Kaepernick kneeling during the national anthem. The intersection of sports and politics has always been messy, polarizing, and impossible to ignore. Cloud, however, found herself in a unique position. Her comments weren't tied to a social justice campaign or a call for equality. Instead, they were tied to a man's death, and many argued that was where the line had been crossed. Critics of Cloud pointed out that her timing couldn't have been worse. The New York Liberty were deep in the playoff hunt, fighting for wins on the court while their guard was battling headlines off it. Detractors argued that by tweeting in such a volatile moment, Cloud shifted the spotlight from her team's playoff push to her personal opinions. For teammates who had worked all season for this opportunity, that distraction felt unfair. The message from fans and media was blunt. When you put on a professional jersey, your words no longer belong only to youth, they reflect on an entire organization. Supporters countered that Cloud was simply being true to herself. They noted that she had always been outspoken, and that silencing athletes, particularly women, set a dangerous precedent. Why should she be punished for saying what she believed, while male athletes had been applauded or, at least forgiven for, saying worse? To them, Cloud's critics weren't upset about the content of her posts as much as they were uncomfortable with who was delivering them, but even some who defended her right to speak struggled to defend the way she spoke. Joking about a man's assassination was seen as reckless, no matter the context. Activism demands credibility, and Cloud's words risked undermining her past work on social justice causes. Instead of amplifying important conversations, her tweets became the conversation and, not in a way that helped her or the movements she supported. The situation highlighted the delicate balance athletes must maintain. On one side lies the undeniable power of using a public platform to shed light on issues. On the other lies the responsibility of representing a league, a team, and fans who don't all share the same beliefs. Cloud's mistake, many argued, wasn't that she spoke, it was that she spoke without thinking about the weight of her position. As the backlash intensified, comparisons began to surface. Some recalled past controversies where athletes had spoken out and still thrived, while others pointed to cases where one ill-timed comment derailed entire careers. Which path Cloud would follow was still uncertain, but one thing was clear: this was no longer just about her tweets. It was about whether the WNBA could allow its players to wade into the most heated cultural battles without dragging the league into the fire, and that fire was only spreading. The bigger question looming wasn't whether Cloud had overstepped, it was whether the league itself would be forced to step in and draw the line. The storm around Natasha Cloud's comments forced everyone to confront a larger question. Where does free expression end? And where does professional responsibility begin? In theory, every athlete has the same rights as any citizen to voice an opinion, even if that opinion is unpopular. But in practice, things get complicated. Unlike an ordinary person tweeting from home, a professional athlete represents more than themselves. They represent their team, their league, their sponsors, and in many ways, the image of the sport as a whole. Cloud's defenders were quick to argue that silencing her would be hypocritical in a league that has long prided itself on supporting player activism. The WNBA, after all, has positioned itself as one of the most socially conscious sports leagues in America. With players often speaking out on issues of race, gender, and justice, to punish Cloud too harshly, her supporters said, would betray that legacy and send the message that players can only speak up when their opinions are convenient for the league. But critics fired back with a hard truth. Free speech does not mean freedom from consequences. They argued that Cloud's comments weren't simply activism. They were careless words that mocked the death of a man, regardless of his politics. That, they said, was where responsibility should have kicked in. To them, it wasn't about silencing an athlete. It was about demanding accountability when an athlete's words caused harm. This tug-of-war between freedom and responsibility isn't new. History is filled with examples of athletes punished or ostracized for speaking out. Yet there's a crucial difference here. Figures like Ali or Kaepernick made sacrifices by standing on principle, even when it cost them dearly. Cloud, by contrast, appeared to have posted out of impulse without considering the broader impact. That distinction made it harder for many to rally behind her in the same way. The bigger danger, however, lies beyond one player's mistake. The normalization of hostility, mocking, ridiculing, or justifying violence toward those with opposing views threatens to erode the very foundation of dialogue in society. Once lines like that are crossed, it becomes easier for others to do the same, pushing boundaries further until outright hate speech becomes normalized. For the WNBA, already fighting to expand its audience and strengthen its reputation, this was the last kind of spotlight it needed. Sponsors and league officials were surely watching closely. No brand wants to be tied to controversy that alienates half its customer base. No commissioner wants to see playoff games overshadowed by political outrage. The balancing act became clear: defend Cloud too strongly and risk backlash from fans who felt she had gone too far. Punish her too harshly and risk alienating players who might feel their voices are being stifled. This was the crossroads where the story sat. Natasha Cloud had raised a conversation much larger than herself. It wasn't just about one deleted tweet, it was about what happens when the ideals of freedom crash against the demands of responsibility in the unforgiving world of professional sports, and the league couldn't avoid that question forever. As the controversy around Natasha Cloud gained steam, attention shifted from the player herself to the league that employs her. The WNBA suddenly found itself trapped in a no-win situation. Its silence was deafening, and every day, without an official statement, fueled more speculation about what the league would or should do. The WNBA has long prided itself on supporting its players' right to speak on social issues. From campaigns against racial injustice to vocal support of LGBTQ rights, the league has positioned itself as progressive and socially conscious. But Cloud's comments weren't seen by many as advocacy. They were seen as reckless and inflammatory. For critics, the WNBA's refusal to immediately condemn her words looked like tacit approval. For supporters, silence was a relief, a sign that the league was protecting its players' freedom of expression. That balancing act created a PR nightmare. Sponsors and team executives were quietly pressuring the league office, worried that Cloud's comments could damage the brand. At the same time, player representatives were whispering that if Cloud were disciplined, it would set a dangerous precedent for censoring athletes. The commissioner and league leadership were effectively walking a tightrope, trying to avoid alienating either side while protecting the league's fragile image. The impact on the New York Liberty was just as complicated. The team had worked all season to build momentum, and now their playoff run was buried under headlines about politics and controversy. Reporters asked coach Sandy Brondelot whether Cloud's tweets were a distraction. Teammates like Breanna Stewart and Sabrina Ionescu couldn't avoid being dragged into conversations they never signed up for. A single player's words had become a burden the entire roster had to carry. The silence also raised another uncomfortable question. Would the league have reacted faster if it had been a different player? Some fans argued that star power influences discipline and that a role player might have been fined or suspended already. Others countered that the WNBA's cautious approach was less about favoritism and more about fear of alienating a player base that has historically been at the forefront of activism. Meanwhile, social media kept the fire burning. Hashtags calling for Cloud's suspension trended side by side with hashtags defending her. Each new news cycle added another layer of scrutiny, and still, the WNBA offered no clarity. For fans looking for leadership, that silence felt like abandonment. For players watching closely, it felt like a test of how far the league was willing to go in supporting their voices. In the end, the WNBA's dilemma wasn't just about Natasha Cloud. It was about defining the boundaries of athlete expression in an era where every tweet can become a headline. By saying nothing, the league kept itself out of direct conflict. But it also left both sides of the debate angrier than before. And with the playoffs in full swing, that unresolved tension threatened to explode at any moment. But the silence wouldn't last forever. The outrage online was growing too loud, and fans were demanding action. Whether the league liked it or not, they were about to be forced into the conversation. By the time Natasha Cloud's deleted tweets and controversial comments reached every corner of social media, the outrage had taken on a life of its own. What began as a few screenshots shared by critics snowballed into a full-blown online firestorm. Fans, journalists, and political commentators all weighed in, turning the situation into one of the most polarizing stories to hit the WNBA in years. The reactions were divided, but the anger dominated. Hashtags like #SuspendCloud and #WNBA accountability trended as thousands of users demanded punishment. Conservative commentators pointed to her words as proof that professional athletes were out of touch and irresponsible. Even neutral fanspeople who didn't care much about politics expressed disappointment, saying Cloud's behavior distracted from what should have been an exciting playoff run. For many, the entire episode confirmed their belief that athletes sometimes forget the responsibility that comes with the SBO spotlight. But just as many were ready to defend her, supporters argued that the backlash was hypocritical, noting that male athletes in other leagues had said inflammatory things and often escaped without serious consequences. They saw the outrage as selective, fueled by people eager to silence outspoken women. Others insisted that Cloud was simply highlighting the same rhetoric KIRK himself had been accused of promoting, and that her critics were willfully ignoring that context. For these defenders, Cloud was less a villain and more a casualty of a double standard. The online arguments quickly escalated into toxic territory. Posts flooded Twitter and Instagram with doctored memes mocking Cloud, while others spread wild rumors about potential suspensions or fines. On the opposite side, her supporters accused the league of cowardice for not standing firmly behind her. The result was chaos, with the WNBA caught in the middle of a digital tug-of-war that it had no control over. Inside the Liberty fanbase, the split was even sharper. Some fans threatened to boycott games unless Cloud faced consequences, while others vowed to stand behind her no matter what. Ticket holders wrote open letters calling on the team to issue a statement. The once celebratory mood around the Liberty's playoff push had been poisoned, and every victory or loss now carried the shadow of Cloud's controversy. National media seized on the story, giving it airtime well beyond sports segments. Political pundits debated her comments on cable news, drawing parallels between Cloud's situation and larger cultural battles over free speech. Each clip, each soundbite, each headline poured gasoline on the fire. And with Stephen A. Smith's comments already shaping the narrative, Cloud's reputation seemed to be spiraling out of her control. The reaction made one thing clear. This wasn't just about a single tweet anymore. It was about the collision of sports, politics, race, and responsibility in a hyper-connected world. Natasha Cloud had become a symbol in a debate much bigger than herself, and the fans' divided voices ensured that her story would not quietly fade away. But as the dust continued to swirl, one final question lingered. Could she ever step back onto the court without this controversy following her every move? Natasha Cloud's situation is a reminder of how quickly the world of sports can collide with the volatility of politics. What began as a single tweet spiraled into a nationwide firestorm, forcing fans, teammates, and the WNBA itself to confront questions bigger than basketball. Her words, whether impulsive or intentional, became a symbol of the dangerous line athletes walk when using their platforms. Supporters see her as a player unfairly targeted for speaking her mind, while critics see recklessness that disrespected a man's death and damaged the league's image. What's undeniable is that the controversy has left a mark not just on Cloud, but on the conversation about freedom, accountability, and responsibility in sports, the question now isn't only about Natasha Cloud's future in the WNBA. It's about whether the league can withstand the fallout of a storm that shows no signs of ending anytime soon.